change, planetary level change. Resilience is all about understanding the limits to change and how far you want the system to go before it tips into some kind of undesirable state. So rural stewards, landowners, farmers, fishermen, foresters play an extraordinarily important role right in the center of this. To a very large extent, what they do will determine whether the planet tips into some undesirable state or not. What they do is also determined by the kinds of support they get from governments and from non-government agencies. It also depends to a very large degree on the policy framework within which they operate. Just very quickly, I'll stick them all so you can look at them while I'm thinking about it. Resilience models, resilience thinking is based on these three models. The first is the adaptive cycle, which explains how systems change through time. It's a very general, simple model, but it helps you understand processes of change in social and ecological systems. This is the same model, but in a three-dimensional framework, which shows the relationship between potential, which is in essence all the capitals within the system, the social, the ecological, the financial, the built, and so on, and connectedness, which is the internal controls of the system, and how the interaction between those either enhance or reduce the resilience of the system. These two little red dots here represent spots or points of maladaptation. Up here, you have systems that get stuck in rigidity traps. That means that they are unable to change when change is needed. Bureaucratic government agencies are very good examples of systems that get stuck and can't change when change is needed. And at the opposite end here, we have poverty traps. These are systems where people and nature, for one reason or another, are unable to reorganize and grow and develop as they should. And we've heard lots of examples today from the developing world of rural communities that are stuck in poverty traps of one kind or another. And these two things are related. Just in addition to being an old-time conservationist and then someone who worked very extensively with landowners around eastern and southern Africa, farmers both large-scale and small-scale. I actually come from a small farm in the United Kingdom. My brother, he listens to me on occasion and implements some of the ideas that I put to him about how he might increase the resilience of his farm. What he's done is taken the farm through two series of transformations because of shocks, disturbance events, which would have rendered the farm unviable if he hadn't transformed it. So those transformational changes, they occurred when the farm was at this sort of state and a shock came in. And the first instance, the shock was the death of my father and the inability of the farm to maintain what was essentially an industrial kind of dairy operation. So the farm was then reorganized as a beef operation, and it grew and it was prosperous. And then there was an outbreak of mad cow disease, or bovine spongiform encephalitis, that it immediately took the farm from a position of profit into a position of loss. So my brother had to reorganize it again, take it through another transformation, and it's now a farm that's producing grass-fed organic beef, environmental education, and both solar and wind energy. So these are examples, just from one farm in Cornwall, of how systems, farming systems, rural systems can be transformed to deal with the shocks and disturbances that come unexpectedly out of nowhere. Again, picking up on something that Celia said about conservation and what Conservation International now is doing in terms of its major policies with regard to recognizing how important landowners are to biodiversity conservation. I started doing that kind of work back in 1989 when I moved from a state agency into a small non-profit agency. I started to work in different parts of the United States. In the United States, they really didn't like the idea of farmers being involved in conservation. The idea of collaborative conservation between farmers and state agencies was looked down on. Over the 12, 13 years now that I've been in and out of the United States, there's been a major sea change. And that kind of sea change is as a result of this. It's these small-scale local experiments where people are trying to do different things. And we've heard lots of examples today of those small-scale experiments. And it's those small-scale experiments that can lead to change in the bigger system. And it's that change in the bigger system that we need right now because of those global tipping points that we're looking at. To a large extent, the globe is stuck in a trap here, a rigidity trap of industrialization and global economic growth based on an industrial model. It has served humanity very well for a very long period of time. But because of what we're seeing now in terms of changes in climate and biodiversity, we have to reconsider and think about doing it differently. So, I'm getting the wind up signal. In terms of empowering rural communities, this is I put the reference here. It's a very important finding of a bit of research that tells us about how the things that we can do to detect thresholds of undesirable change and avoid them. And the key finding from that bit of research is that when you're managing those fast variables, that's those things at the bottom end of the panoply that I was showing you, flexible management can get you out of a hole. If you're dealing with slow variables or if you're dealing with bureaucratic management, it's going to be very difficult to adapt and change when you need to change. So one of the implications of that is that there needs to be a lot more authority to devolve to local landowners, landowner communities, to give them the flexibility that they need to adapt and experiment and change to deal with the kinds of change that are going to be pushed upon them by climate change. This is a set of very general attributes for resilience. Anybody who's put off by all the spaghetti and the complexity of dynamic models, they can actually do a very simple resilience assessment based on these things. They're tied directly to the models, as I've indicated here. An analysis like that will give you a very good indication of the state of the resilience of your system and will lead you on then to think perhaps more about the dynamics of the system. So I'll cut it off there before Steve throws us down. So I'll leave that up there. Good. Thank you.
Hello? Just getting out of the light that's just shining in my eyes. Hi, my name is Paul Laird from the Watch Institute. I'd just like to say a word of thanks to all of the speakers. Could we give them all a round of applause, please? Thank you. I would also like to say a word of thanks to all of you for coming and joining this session and actually for the close attention. Sometimes these afternoon sessions are tough, particularly when you have something like 7 presentations in a row, but people have been very good and very attentive. We've got about 20 minutes left, so I'd like to throw the floor open. We've left this sort of overview of resilience. I've lost it, have we? We'll try and get it back. As we've seen, we've ranged over a huge range of different landscapes in very, very different situations. 4 years ago, the last World Conservation Congress, in Barcelona, I was very concerned that there were very few opportunities for conservationists and agriculturalists to talk together. There seemed to be a sense that we were somehow in competition with each other. So I think it's an enormous change that's taken place in those 4 years, where it seems to have become much more commonplace for conservation and agriculture to work together. We've talked a lot about resilience, but for me personally, the thing that I think we've also talked a lot about is respect for farmers as stewards of landscapes. And to me, that's been a great message. So I'd like to throw it open. Anybody who would like to say a word, please just say your name, where you're from, and keep it brief so that others could have a chance. Either just a brief observation that we can also add to our notes, or a question to any of the panel members. I can see there's a roving mic at the back. Please, one here and one here. Yes, start down here, and then sir, we'll come to you in a moment.
Thanks very much, Nigel Zerthos. Very briefly, great presentations. This is about sort of memory, ecological memory, and what advice might be given in 10 years' time. And I wanted to address my question to Celia. In terms of the conservation movement and the lessons learned from your work, how can that get fed into the agricultural advisors within the country at either a local or national level, so that in 10 years' time the lessons learned from your 2-year project is embedded into the sort of DNA of technical assistance within the ministry? I know it's difficult, but it seems to me that we are sometimes reinventing wheels, and when there are success stories like this, there's the duty of care to get it into government and local government knowledge base.
I think my colleagues from CI Madagascar will talk about the specific case of Madagascar, but I think the key thing is that when we do this type of research and gather this type of evidence, we shouldn't be doing it by ourselves as conservation organisations. We're always doing it with partners in the field, and so we're doing it with local communities, with any farmer organisations, with the extension services of the governments. We're making sure that right from the beginning we have a clear target in terms of getting who we want to get the information to, how we share that information, and what policies we may want to influence with the information we gather. And so for each of the projects we do, the in-country field office from Conservation International will have those links and will be very much in tune with what the opportunities are for making sure that whatever results we have, we are policy focused and applicable. And I could say in other places around the world where we're doing similar types of research, we have actually now started making sure that we involve extension agents in the actual research per se, so that they are helping us design it, helping analyse the data, and helping think through how we apply the results to work on the ground.
Thanks very much. Perhaps you could pass the mic to the gentleman at the back. Just picking up, Celia, on those comments, one of the things we've heard about is the importance of really a long-term approach, and another thing we've heard about is the importance of continuing support to these processes, that you can't just leave it to look after itself. Please,
thank you. I'm Paul from Thailand Environment Institute. The more I see the connectivity between the rural areas and urban areas concerning the biodiversity. I don't know whether you have had any experiences regarding the development and maintaining the urban biodiversity. And this is really very, very demanding and very alarming regarding the strengthening and the resilient ability or capability, right? That you can see the connectivity and the relationship between urban and rural. I think that we overemphasize or create some sort of the disconnectivity between the urban and rural. And the urbanization is growing so fast. And after that, the biodiversity in the rural areas could be survived if it do not try to maintain or create the urban biodiversity. I don't know whether you try to learn from your experiences, whether you have had any success, project concerning urban biodiversity.
Thank you. I think it's a really good observation. It's a really interesting one. Any of the panel members like to comment on that?
I know that a number of my colleagues at the Resilience Centre are considering it very seriously from two perspectives. One is just maintaining green areas within the city as lungs for the city, but also in terms of enhancing their capacity to produce food. One of the biggest challenges we're going to face is the interaction between rapidly expanding urban areas and the hinterland upon which they're dependent, and the sort of moving the people off the land and into cities, often to places where there isn't the wherewithal to support them. So it's another big challenge that we have to face.
Thank you, Mike. Any further observations or questions, please? Yes, at the back. Yes,
hello, my name is Philip Bob. I work for the Network Conservation Monitoring Centre. And I don't know if it's a question, but a kind of observation around the subject of resilience and how we talk about it. It's clearly a very important and growing subject. And I kind of would like to suggest that we also think in terms of more rigour about when we use the term resilience, because resilience as such is a kind of neutral concept in the sense of, we tend to think it's always a good thing, we want more resilience, but if you have an ecosystem or a social system which is in an undesirable state, say a very degraded landscape with no soil and no trees left, it could be very resilient in that state to change. It's kind of stuck there, or a social system where there's lots of poverty and it's very